Thank you for tuning in to Bronco Tales with the College of Health Sciences. Dr. Rock pursued a Master's of Social Work at the University of Denver. She then earned a PhD in Human Development and Family Studies from Penn State University. Dr. Rock now works as a clinical assistant professor of social work at Boise State University and has been with us for just over 2 years. Dr. Rock's specialty dives deeper into the vast field of social work, where she found her true passion, forensic and criminal legal social work. She has worked on over hundreds of juvenile life without parole or juvenile transfer cases, as well as cases where clients are facing or serving a sentence of capital punishment. Another aspect of Dr. Rock's job relates to state and national level policy initiatives and program development in various sectors of social work and social work education. I'd like to warmly welcome Dr. Jacoba Rock to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Jacoba Rock. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm also a clinical faculty member at Boise State School of Social Work. And I love my degree in social work. It's been useful in a lot of ways. My focus is in working in the criminal legal system in order to create change for individuals who are in the system, like young people who are incarcerated, but also to change the system through evaluation and advocacy for system change in courts and in correctional settings. But I didn't always know that that's what I wanted to do. When I was younger, I really wanted to be a writer and a journalist, and that's what I originally went to college for, was to become a journalist. I think I thought I'd be like Lois Lane and kind of report on the exciting things going on in the world. But at that time that I was in college, journalism was unclear. It was uncertain what the future of journalism would look like because the internet was just becoming popular. So I'm kind of dating myself here. But at that time, I specifically wanted to be a magazine journalist, and it looked like magazines weren't going to have a future at that time. So the entire industry was like really depressing. And I got an internship at a music magazine that I was all excited about, but everybody there was like really downtrodden about the state of journalism.
Mhm.
So at a certain point, I wasn't nearly as excited. But it turns out writing is really important. I use writing a lot for research and for advocacy efforts. And so in the end, I'm glad that I, was excited about writing and get some training in good writing. The other thing that sort of led me to where I am now is that I grew up with an incarcerated family member, a family member who's still incarcerated. And I spent, my childhood visiting regularly, going into prisons. And that wasn't like my friends, where I was sort of different from other people, or at least I thought. And some of that was because I grew up in a, very white community in Pennsylvania. And so I don't think a lot of the community interacted with folks who were incarcerated or had family members incarcerated. But I remember, sort of being curious about the prison environment early on, because it was a, obviously a very different setting from kind of my neighborhood and small town area. But also like having a lot of empathy for what people experience when they're behind bars. Prisons are very like dirty places. They don't get good food there. There's a lot of it can be very depressing and isolating. And so, I grew up developing that kind of like empathy and lens. And so I didn't know that's what I wanted to pursue professionally. I think that for many of us, what we end up doing in our careers dovetails in some way with our personal and family life experience. And so my family had experienced a lot of adversity and trauma, and my family member going to prison was just one example of that. But I think that led me to be more empathetic and feel for people who are also going through challenges. And that is very common for social work students, is to have some sort of adversity in their background where, they now want to help others because of the challenges that they've been through or they've seen
Yeah,
family
that's
go
understandable.
through.
So, of your degrees and work through college, which piece did you enjoy doing the most?
Sure. So I love my social work degree. I received, like you said, my MSW from the University of Denver in 2010, and my specialization in that program was with high-risk youth. So I learned a lot about how to assess youth, some of the research behind youth decision making and challenges, particularly for youth from marginalized backgrounds. And in a social work degree program, you get to engage in field placements. I had two of them and had the opportunity to work directly with youth while I was in the program, youth who were specifically incarcerated and in other ways in the criminal legal system. So that really allowed me to pursue my area of passion, but also have support from faculty and figuring out how to apply the skills and knowledge that I was gaining in my program. And now as a professor, that's exactly what I get to help support students around is on the classroom side, providing them with the skills and knowledge they'll need. And then they also get an opportunity to use those strategies out in field.
So yeah, and you mentioned um, an alternative dispute resolution certificate, I believe.
Mhm.
What does that entail?
Yeah, so in addition to my MSW, just before I went to my MSW program, I was running a restorative justice program that was based in a police department in Longmont, Colorado, and had also run a restorative justice program at a university campus at the University of Colorado at Boulder, where I got my undergraduate degree. And so I was interested in gaining some more skills useful to the restorative justice process. Restorative justice is used in a lot of different settings as an alternative way, an alternative method to responding to crime or conflict. And in the program that I was running in the police department, police officers would refer cases of both juveniles and adults, but usually low level cases, and try to basically avoid sending them through the court system by instead having the community use dialogue, restorative dialogue, where community members would come together, as well as the people who were responsible for the crime and the people who were impacted by the crime, to all discuss what had happened, how they were harmed, and what needed to be done about it. And I ran that program and wanted to get an advanced degree that would allow me to better understand conflict and how to manage conflict and facilitate those kinds of conversations.
And you from Colorado?
I'm not from Colorado. I spent the first 10 years of my degree there and then moved back to Pennsylvania to be
Okay.
with my family, especially to take care of my dad. Mhm.
Awesome. Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, what does social work as a whole look like instead of just your specific niche, things such as counseling, rehab, therapy, um, what can someone expect from any social work in job in the field?
So, social work is a very broad field. It's one of the helping professions. We consider ourselves to be helping professionals. A social work degree can be used to do a lot. We consider social work practice to occur at what we think of as micro, meso, and macro levels. So, at the micro level, we're engaged in direct practice work, helping individuals and families and groups in a variety of settings. It could be in healthcare, like in a hospital or a treatment center, mental health care specifically. There's a lot of social workers who provide therapy and counseling, licensed social workers. Or substance use counseling specifically. We work in schools, we work in child welfare. So, just a variety of settings where people need help. So, my focus in the criminal legal system is a pretty small niche, but growing quickly because a lot of people recognize how much need there is there, but there's really need everywhere. And I would say that we're different from other direct practice mental health professions like psychology and some of the more psychology rooted professions, in that we also are interested in pursuing social justice and looking at systemic and social issues that are the root of those problems that people are encountering, in addition to just the individual level. So that kind of separates us from other helping professions. But we also operate at meso and macro levels. And what I mean by that is at the meso level, we work a lot in organizations. We do program evaluation. I engage in program evaluation specific to criminal legal issues, and other research. We do policy advocacy. We do community organizing more at the macro level. So we do practice across levels where we're not all directly serving or providing therapy or counseling, case management, those other kind of day-to-day roles where we're interacting directly with people.
So it is more broad level than like a high school therapist or counselor per se. You do more in
It
the
could
social
be.
justice aspect.
Mhm. Yeah, it could be. I mean, school social workers interact with youth just like
Right.
counselors. or psychologists might, but often address some of the more systemic issues, especially those encountered by young people from marginalized backgrounds.
And what program here at Boise State are you a part of? And does Boise State as a whole offer in social work?
So I teach primarily for the MSW online program. We have an MSW program that is present both online and then also in person. So you can complete an MSW degree at Boise State online or in person on campus. We also have a BSW program that is in person, so an undergraduate degree in social work. And we are in the process of developing a BSW online program as well. So we have online and in person options in Boise, but I primarily teach at the graduate level. We also in the MSW program have an advanced standing option where either in person or online students who already have a BSW can complete an MSW, their graduate degree, in as little as a year.
And what do those classes that you teach look like? Do you do a lot of projects, a lot of like reading and stuff like that?
Sure. So we have a variety of classes in our social work programs. Some are more practice oriented classes where students learn skills like counseling skills
Mhm.
for helping individuals, families, and groups. We also have classes that are more focused on research and program evaluation, or even just how to use research in the field. We have field courses. So while students are out in the field, which is a big important part of a social work degree, while students are out in the field engaging and helping with people, they also take classes alongside that work to help support them in doing that. The classes that I primarily teach are a program evaluation class, a couple of human behavior and social environment classes where students learn underlying theory. They learn why problems exist and what to do about it based on theory and research. And then I also teach a class that focuses on identity specific considerations. So reasons why people might be experience oppression or marginalization because of certain identities that they have.
Yeah, that sounds interesting and a lot more involved than like a therapist at the high school level, or college level, and more based on like the systematic, like you said, the systematic ideas. Um, as we're like, I remember my high school counselor did a lot of like, oh, class changes, oh, helping sign up for college, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
a school counselor in the K through 12 setting is usually focused on more academics, like you said.
mhm.
A therapist role is a little different, and social workers can be and often are therapists.
Okay.
So, therapist is a role instead of a degree, and a variety of clinical degrees can get you to a point where you can be licensed and be a therapist. So, social work is one option, psychology or psychological counseling is another option. So, there are kind of
Okay.
a but a lot of social workers become licensed and do become therapists. I
Mhm.
am not personally. In fact, I tried being a therapist for a little while and I was terrible at it. But a lot of people do that, and the degree and the ongoing training is well equipped to help someone be a therapist.
And that brings up another question of mine. What is like a licensed social worker? What does that entail and what does it mean to be a licensed social worker?
Sure. So you can practice as a social worker in some spaces without licensure.
Okay.
It varies by state, but in many states or most states, it's required or at least strongly expected to have licensure in order to do direct practice. So some of those, like therapy or other roles where you're directly interacting with people in need, you need a clinical licensure. In some states, so it varies by state. In some states, you can get licensed at the bachelor's level. But in all states, you can get licensed with an MSW from an accredited program. And then you also need to take a test and get some additional supervision hours. But many, if not most, of our students pursue licensure just to broaden their career options and be able to have that credential to do direct practice if they'd like to do that.
So it's a pretty standard thing that most social workers have done.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but I would
Yeah.
say a lot of the field
Okay.
gets licensed. Many of our faculty not only have their MSW, but are also licensed in at least one state. Many of them are licensed in Idaho.
Okay. And it's specific to each state.
Yes, so you can be licensed in multiple states. I am, but it's a lot of hoops to jump through,
Okay.
and there are some national efforts to actually create processes whereby you can more easily be licensed in many spaces because now with telehealth, I can get requested to work, clinically in
Okay.
different spaces, and so licensure can be a barrier in that way.
Do those tests look significantly different in each state because of like the different state laws?
No, it's a national test, but different
Okay.
states require different types of tests within that national platform. Like some require clinical or generalist tests. It actually gets pretty complicated. And as I should say about our MSW and BSW programs, we work hard to support students as they pursue these options. So I'm also an advisor. As a professor, I also do some advising of students, and they'll meet with me and try to figure out, well, I live in this state, but I'm moving to this state, and so how do I get licensed? And do I even need to get licensed? And so we
Mhm.
provide a lot of support to help people figure those things out.
Other than being an educator, like what does your outside of Boise State job entail and look like for you and like how you manage it all?
Sure. Well, I don't manage it all. I should start off by saying I drop balls in different places in my life.
Hmm.
But many of us faculty, full-time faculty, get to do some really cool things in our areas of specialization. Some of my clinical colleagues also, they provide therapy. I don't, like I said, that's not my strong suit. But I do practice like many of my other colleagues, and I also engage in some research like some of my colleagues as well. But almost all of my practice and research outside of higher education focuses on the criminal legal system, and it has for a long time. After I received my MSW, I briefly tried out working in child welfare. It was also not something that fit well, not only with my abilities, but I found it to be really triggering in a different kind of way, especially working with young children. And I found myself drawn to working with teenagers, like the unruly
Huh.
teenagers who aren't following the rules. And teenagers and young adults has become sort of my focus within the criminal legal system is how does this system respond to young people, especially young people who come from really rough backgrounds and have made really poor choices. So, um, in my niche, if you call that criminal legal or forensic social work, there are a variety of roles that you could have. So we talked about the difference between like a degree and a role. So some people are therapists in prisons or in reentry centers. Some people do case management and they help people reenter, or they help them, or some people focus on assessment while people are in jail, or it's being determined what they are going to need. So I do some of that direct practice work and assessment. Some people are working out in the community, engaging in advocacy and programs and policies that will benefit this population. Really the focus of my work in assessment and advocacy um, grew in 2012 and 2013 when there was a Supreme Court ruling at the national level that basically said the life without parole sentence for juveniles that we've had in the United States was
Mhm.
unconstitutional. So what that meant was that it was not constitutional to send youth away for life for something they did, regardless of what they did, unless we considered the unique circumstances of their life. And we had hundreds of young people who were serving life without parole at that time in the United States. A lot of those cases were from the 80s and 90s. So in 2012, 2013, when this ruling happened, actually it was a series of rulings. A lot of those people were like in their 30s and 40s. And so I started meeting with that population and going back and looking at their life histories, and many of them had come from severe trauma, child
Is
abuse,
is that what you
just
mean by the unique circumstances?
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. That's exactly it. So, my job was basically to learn about their life stories and also to find out how they had been coping while they had been incarcerated, serving this time of life without parole. And as you can imagine, I mean, if you get told as a young person, you're 16, 17,
Yeah.
that you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison, you
Hmm.
feel pretty hopeless and depressed. And some of them had taken their lives. Many of them had tried to take their lives and had struggled with severe substance use issues, but also many of them had done quite well and kind of of grew out of their unruly
Okay.
teenage behavior.
Hmm.
But they have, and they continue to be, one of my kind of focuses is that young people, no matter how terrible of decisions they've made, should have an opportunity for growth, right? Which is why we, as a country, formed a juvenile justice system, is because we believe that juveniles are different. And that is research supported, right? We know that juveniles aren't fully developed, including, we know a lot more than we did, when the juvenile justice system was founded in the late 1800s. We know a lot more than we did then about the brain, right? And that the brain is continuing to develop, and that young people can't make the same types of decisions that adults make, especially in like peer pressure and substance use
Hmm.
affected kind of
Yeah.
environment. I'm getting off subject a bit, but my goal was to go back and assess their life stories and understand how they had sort of got to that point, how they were doing while they were incarcerated, and then also like what is their potential if they were to get a reentry opportunity, even if it was 10, 20, 30 years down the line. What could they do with their lives? And it turns out many of them were already doing a lot of good things. Like I had a client who had earned a doctoral degree. I had a client who had learned a variety of languages while incarcerated. I had many clients who were helping other people incarcerated, younger versions of themselves, to make better choices and wanted to do counseling or peer specialist kind of work. And so I wrote up these, and I continue to write up these long reports in order to advocate for them to just basically have another shot. So my role is not in any way to say that someone's not guilty of something. I believe that probably many of my clients have made really bad choices and harmful choices. Some of them aren't as bad of choices as the ones they were convicted of, because many juveniles will sort of take the fall, so to speak, for adult co-defendants. So many of my cases were something called felony life cases, where the juvenile was involved in a felony, for example, a car theft or a drug deal, that resulted in someone getting killed, and they weren't the ones who shot the gun or
Right.
did
But they
stabbing,
were
but they were
involved.
there and they were present, and that resulted in them getting a life without parole sentence.
Okay.
And so they had clearly made very harmful and very
Yeah.
immature decisions, but it was because they were immature, right?
Okay.
Because they're juveniles. And so the goal was to sort of say, like, this person needs services, this person needs an opportunity to grow and change and to be back out in the community where they can and will do better. And we do have many of these guys have been resentenced and have been, and I say guys because most of them are male, not all of them. But many of them have been resentenced, and the limited research that we have indicates that many of them are doing quite well. They're not these hardened criminals, right?
Hmm.
They made bad choices as juveniles, harmful choices, but they are able to be productive and safe members of society and to do different things. So I advocate for opportunities, basically. And
That
I
was
also
one of my
advocate for,
questions.
yeah,
Okay.
and I advocate for system change. Like I advocate for
Mhm.
programs and policies that will give people an opportunity to change, as well as won't do as much harm. Because when I went back and looked at these old cases, there was a lot of harm done by the system. There were, speaking of other mental health professionals, there were psychologists who had labeled these youth in really harmful ways, which had those labels had stuck with them, right? And been a barrier to them getting help and to creating change in their lives. So I, kind of went back and did some digging and tried to correct these things, but I also tried to work at the system level to make sure that these kind of atrocities don't happen again.
And when you say you're kind of learning and advocating for them, are you spending time in the juvenile center, talking to them, learning about them, um, stuff like that, as like multiple people at a time? Do you meet with one person? Like, what does your clientele kind of entail?
First, I should say that as a full-time professor, I only take 2 or 3 cases at a time. So I do
Okay.
this, in a pretty limited way.
Uh-huh.
Also because I'm doing research and system work, I don't do a lot of direct practice anymore. But yes, it is individual meetings where, usually many meetings, because it takes a long time to get to know
Yeah,
someone.
definitely.
Um, and yeah, and work toward an assessment. But I'm not only individually meeting with them, and if they're adults, they're in prison, even if they were sentenced as a juvenile.
Right. Yeah.
Um, And I'm not only going in and meeting with them, but I'm, contacting their family and trying to get the
Okay.
family involved in a healthy way. I'm meeting with their attorneys, I'm meeting with other experts. And I am also trying to advocate for more capacity, some more social workers to be able to do that kind of work at the organizational level. So I'm not bored. We keep busy in our area
Yeah.
of practice.
What do you think the biggest problem in the justice system as a whole, not just the juvenile system, is?
Mhm. I should say I don't call it the justice system, and increasingly people refer it to as like a criminal legal and or juvenile legal system.
Okay.
Just recognizing that a lot of people don't experience justice, including people harmed by crime, often don't experience justice. They don't experience restoration or healing through the system. And I think that that kind of answers your question because one of the biggest problems is that we're not clear about why we have this system or what it's supposed to be doing. So there's clearly, a punitive orientation to these systems where, at least for the criminal legal system, we outwardly say, like, someone did something wrong, they should be consequenced, right? But then we also have treatment services, we have people trying to do healing work out in the community, we have people who say it doesn't matter how much someone has healed or gotten better or how unsafe they are, they should be in prison anyway, even if they're perfectly safe. So we don't really know what we're doing with the system. And as a result, it's unclear how we fix this system. So the system is treats people really disparately, right? There's extreme racial and ethnic disparities in the criminal legal system, including in Idaho, where there's an overrepresentation of the Latino population in prisons and jails, but across the country, a significant overrepresentation of Black and brown bodied people, as well as people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Poor people are disproportionately in the system. So I think, like, as evidence that the system isn't working, there's extreme disparities. There's a lot of ineffectiveness. It's extremely costly, costs a lot of money. That may
Hmm.
not be the main reason I want to change the system, but I think more
Yeah.
taxpayers should be concerned because we're putting this much money, in many states it costs $35,000-$40,000 a year to house someone. And if that person isn't unsafe and the main person they were harming is themselves, most people locked up are not violent. They're there for substance use issues and mental health issues. So where are we putting this money, right? And what else could we be doing with this money instead? Could we be investing it in kiddos so that they don't get to this
Yeah.
point where they are engaged in this kind of behavior? So, I mean, there's a lot of the biggest problem is that the system doesn't work, right? But
Yeah.
why the system works, I think there's sort of a variety of reasons, and one of the big ones to me is we just don't know what the system's supposed to do.
Hmm.
That's why we're not sure, how to get it to work better, is because we don't all agree on what we should be doing with this system.
I feel like I see a lot of stuff that, oh, it needs to be reformed, it needs to be changed, it needs to be fixed, but there isn't, like you said, ever really a specific like the cause. There's only the changes that need to be made.
Mm,
And I think kind of how you explained it, the we don't really know how it works is a great explanation as to why there is very little change.
mm. Yeah, I would couple that with, like, one thing we do know is it causes a lot of harm. We know
Hmm.
that people who enter prison are actually more likely to develop substance use issues than people with substance use issues who don't go into prison,
Right.
right? That tells us that the system is actually, it's not just not doing anything,
Making
it's
it
like
worse.
making it worse,
Yeah.
right? And that's true of many social service systems, is that we have a concern that we're actually causing harm. So one solution thrown out there is abolition, right? Just stop intervening in people's lives. They may not have great lives, but we're only making it worse, right?
Hmm.
I don't know that that's the total solution,
Yeah.
um, but I'm interested in something called de-implementation, where we study practices and processes that are causing harm or are ineffective and inefficient, and we just remove those practices and policies, stop doing those things, right? And I always argue, like, it's easy to fund something that will actually not cost anything. So
Yeah.
it's like an easy argument, you don't have to fund a new program, just stop doing things that cause people harm.
Do you have any specific examples of like what you would
Yeah.
de-implement?
Yeah, I think one that a lot of people get behind, including people from more punitive ideologies, is use of isolation, which exacerbates people's mental health
Yeah.
issues. I've worked with clients who have spent years, including during their youth, completely isolated without any contact with anyone. For one of my clients, I was the first human being besides a guard he had seen in like 8 or 9 years.
Wow.
And even with the guards, he didn't have much interaction except for
Yeah.
like food through a slot kind of thing.
Hmm.
So he was very mentally ill, and he hadn't been when he had gone in. And so, clearly that's I think there's strong evidence there, right? That we're doing something that's actually causing more harm. Are there other ways to manage those spaces that make them more safe? So, but I talked with a prison superintendent recently, someone responsible for the prison, who said the same thing to me. He's like, we've got to stop isolating people.
Hmm.
I just don't know how to do it. I don't have
Yeah.
the resources yet to keep people safe without isolating, but we've still got to have that goal. We have that shared goal of stopping isolation. Another common example is the DARE program. I don't know if you had DARE when you were young.
No, I have seen like the sticker,
Mhm.
but it was never in they do it in school, right?
Yeah, so when I was
I
growing up in the 80s and 90s, DARE was popular
Okay.
nationally. I think it's still used nationally, but maybe not quite as popular as it
Uh-huh.
was then. It was basically this sort of just say no idea, like teach young people to just say no to drugs and alcohol. That was the focus, was substance use. Well, come to find out, a lot of us, myself included, by the way, didn't know much about drugs and still until they started telling us about it. And then I was like really fascinated, like, oh, that sounds interesting. Let's
Uh-huh.
go try that out. So some research came out in the 90s and early 2000s, is basically said exactly what I've been talking about. That not only does DARE not work, but it actually increases some risk. And that's been another common example of like, what should we de-implement? Okay, we should stop doing things that actually increase the risk for young people.
And that's just like parallels right into the prison system, like you said, that it actually makes it
Mhm.
worse.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the substance use is one of, if not the strongest contributor to the size of our incarceration, mass incarceration. One of the
Hmm.
biggest issues is not only substance use, but our disparate treatment of substance use. If we look back on kind of the war on drugs and, the ways that we tried to manage substance use and co-occurring substance use and mental health, we sent away thousands and thousands of people, disparately, Black men to prison for nothing violent, but for years and years away from their family. Well, now they're not raising their kids, right? And we know what that does to a kiddo to not have parents or to have an incarcerated parent. So we just sort of fueled these intergenerational issues. And again, not to keep anyone safe. When for most people engaged in substance use, the person they're harming is themselves.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, not an evidence-based or ethical response, but as a result, we have obviously a
Yeah.
huge problem.
And one last question, before we wrap it up. We've covered a lot of hard topics. How do you yourself you're always the helping person. How do you help yourself get through some of these things?
It's a great question, one that we love in social work. If you get a social work degree, we actually teach you about self-care and community care, and this idea that we should be working together. And I have a rough day, so you help take care of me, and then you have a rough day, and I help take care of you, because it's really the only way to make this sustainable. I think we started having more real conversations about like what do I really need, because I'm personally not the healthiest person either, right? And in today's kind of world, how do you do it all? Going back to one of your original comments, like you can't, right? Like I'm a
Hmm.
parent, but I also work full time.
Yeah.
And I mean, my family has means and a lot of families don't, right? So like how do you do this and still take care of yourself? Self-care is not the only answer. Like I can take good care of myself, but it's hard to make it. So we really need to create change to these systems in
Yeah.
order for people to get healthier.
What do you think social work looks like in 10 years?
You know, there is this social work scholar who runs Dr. Laura Nissen, who runs a website that is focused on social work futures, or what she calls, and we call futures thinking. anticipating the future and what needs will exist. And I think about this a lot as an educator. Like, I don't want to prepare students to only solve the problems that are currently existing, right? We may have completely different problems in the next 10 years. 10 years ago, we didn't know about this COVID-19 pandemic that's completely affected mental health and families and the education system. So, I mean, we have to prepare students for that. So we engage students in some activities thinking about, will there be multiple planets you can live on? And do we need to be prepared to help people to adjust to moving to another planet? Or what about cloning, or, and genetic counseling kind of starts to get into this, but like, how do we help people manage the additional information we're going to know about our genetic risk and our
Yeah.
genetic future, right? So yeah, there we need to be looking ahead to science and technology and how it's affecting our lives and the kind of mental health and systemic implications of that, how will we as a field be able to address that. But we're in demand right now. There's a lot of problems in the world, and
Uh-huh.
my guess is there will also be a lot of problems in 10 years,
Yeah.
and we anticipate those problems and prepare for them.
That that is really interesting. That it takes that futuristic of a idea and then the problems that go along with all of those that are soon to be in
Yeah.
fruition, I think.
You gotta think about it without getting too depressed, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's a little scary, isn't it, to think about, 10
Yeah.
years ago, not knowing all that we know now and what could happen in the next 10 years, but, it's also really, really important, and those of us who are parents or have families like we have reminders every day of how
Mhm.
important it is to invest in what's coming up.
I think that wraps it up. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And unless you have anything else that you want to share,
Think of anything. Thank you so much.
so yeah, thank you for being here.